Good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending another webinar. Today is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be talking about security and how Onshape has been developed with security in mind. So it's mostly going to be PowerPoints. I kind of ahead of time apologize for that, but there'll be some interesting information in there that's good to know. So first of all, EAC and Onshape take security very seriously. We want companies to be able to focus on product development and not have to worry about people hacking into their system or losing data. And so we do everything we can with that in mind. So I'm not really holding a poll here, but I'm showing you some poll results from a previous poll that we had. But the first question is, how do you view, or what do you view as your largest threat to your CAD security? And the options are, disgruntled or careless employees, sharing data with suppliers, crashing data, malware, viruses, hacks, or intrusions. So which of those are the largest threat? And this is put to a previous audience, and the results are here. So as you can see that it's sharing data with suppliers is considered the largest threat, followed by crashing and data corruption, and then hacks, employees, and then finally, lastly, malware. And then another question is, if you think about cloud-based CAD, do you think that that is more or less secure? Do you think it's more secure than your typical CAD system? And the results are, majority of people thought that it was, which is really kind of interesting. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk several different areas. We're going to talk about the realities of traditional CAD. What would you do if you could start over from scratch? What kind of system would you build? And then also the security concerns that exist in the world. Onshape is kind of doing things a better way, in the way that it's engineered and developed. And then also security is important to Onshape, but also the ability to make your product and your information available. And then finally, responsibilities on your part. We all have responsibilities in security. It's not a one-way street. So let's start off talking about this. So traditional CAD is desktop-based. Back in the old days, it was a mainframe server or something like that. But nowadays, it's on a desktop and a laptop. And the thing is, everything revolves around that desktop or laptop. So the engineers revolve around it. They can only do their work when they're at that particular workstation. And all the files are brought to that particular workstation as well. Whether you're pulling it from a PDM system or a shared drive or something, they eventually get to that workstation where they can be either developed or worked on. Okay, what happens if people or files have to move? Well, we're talking about files, so we're going to take those and maybe email them somewhere else, use Dropbox, flash drives, FTP, use a PDM system, VPNs, different ways of moving these different files around. But then, where are all your files, right? That's your intellectual property. Where have they gone? And who's protecting them? So there's the concept of productivity versus security, and really who wins in that fight? And it's really neither one wins. You'll lose productivity if your designers go home or at their customer site because they're away from those workstations. So they can't do or get access to the information that they might need. And you also sacrifice security when you're sharing files with suppliers or partners or manufacturers. Once you give a copy of your data to somebody, whether it's a PDF or a CAD file or anything, you can't get it back. And so kind of working on trust that that information doesn't wander off somewhere or get misused. So if you could start over from what you know, what would you do? If you could have a CAD design that was always available whenever you need it, that would be great. What if you needed people to have the right version? I mean, that's another thing. That's why people buy PDM systems, so you get the latest version, the released version, or whatever. The way Onshape works is everybody gets the correct latest version of the information. And along with that, what if you could protect everything against both natural disasters and hacking attempts? And the thing is when we're sharing our IP, Onshape is different. I was mentioning before files and files wandering off somewhere. Onshape doesn't use files. It is not a file system. Your intellectual property, your designs, your products are accessible. And if you want a file, you could save it out as a step file or a SolidWorks file or a Rhino file or IGES or PDF. And that's when you have a file. But Onshape only has files when you ask it to create a file to distribute. And the thing is that Onshape, we can share that information without creating these files and without pushing them out to other people. We simply just grant access for them to view that information. And with that, we can revoke that access anytime we want. So we don't have a file laying out there on somebody's drive that we gave them access to a year ago, and it's still sitting there. All we have to do is hit the little check mark next to the permissions on that particular person. They no longer have access to that file or that information. So Onshape took 20 years of CAD experience and started all over again with a modern platform. They developed a cloud-based system. And the nice thing with cloud-based is easy accessibility. That's one of the biggest benefits of Onshape, is that it's easy to access that information because we can access it with anything that can access the cloud, that can access the internet. And that could be a laptop or a workstation, could be your cell phone or a tablet. We can also take into account that the amount of money spent on infrastructure drops significantly because all the infrastructure is handled in the cloud. There are no downloads, no installs, anything like that. And there's no files, as I mentioned before. So it's great for a company that needs to be agile, that needs to have flexibility, not only in developing products, but accessing that information. But as a cloud safe, that's what most people ask. They ask two things, right? When we introduce Onshape, first of all, is it going to be really slow? If I call up a 1 GB model, how slow is it going to be? And then after we call it up and you spin it around and you see how easy it is, it's like that whole argument goes away, right? Because we're using the access of the servers, right? We're using their RAM, their speed, and we're just viewing it on our laptop or our phone. The other question is the cloud safe? So I kind of diverged a little bit, but it's a fair question. So a lot of security fears, right? And they're well-founded. There's data theft, data loss. That happens anywhere, and not just in the cloud, but we've seen all kinds of examples of that. There's also marketing hype that says, the cloud is purely safe and you don't have to worry about it. And there's nothing that is 100% safe in this world. But if you think about it, Onshape in the cloud is a professionally managed data center, right? So think about your data. Is it in a professionally managed data center? I mean, that's kind of an interesting question, but with Onshape it is. So talk a little bit about how information isn't immune to virus attacks, or in this case, ransomware. So about 4 years ago, there was a ransomware attack called WannaCry, and it went global. And it basically used Windows operating system and files to proliferate. And it went to hospitals, government institutions, and basically held them for ransom. And it took some of these companies years to get all that information back. There's a lot of people still restoring information. Onshape wasn't impacted by this at all. But we've seen other incidents more recently. We saw a pipeline on the East Coast, a major pipeline shut down. We saw a meat producer shut down. So what these ransomware attacks do is they really kind of attack things in two ways. They either go in and attack a file and prevent you from accessing the file. They encrypt that file so you can't get at it, or they encrypt devices where those files are held and you can't get on the device to get at the information. Those are kind of the two ways that ransomware works, and that seems to be the most prevalent kind of attack lately. So we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. So there's 6 ways that Onshape improves security. All data is encrypted when it's being transferred or broadcast from the server to your mobile device or your laptop. In addition, all the data that's on the hard drive in the servers is encrypted. There are strict controls over network traffic. The one thing with Onshape is it records everybody who accesses everything and when and for how long. So it's very easy to monitor things, who's accessing what and by whom and for how long and where they're at when they do that. We have automated systems that react to threat. So they automatically kick in if a threat is detected. And security rules and things like that are managed by code and not by individuals doing things by hand. So using cloud computing is a better way. Cloud services allow you to access your data in a professionally managed data center, as I mentioned before. There are multiple sources of power to keep things running and network connectivity. So it's one centrally managed service that protects your data and allows you access to that data. Onshape uses Amazon services, Amazon Web Services, and it uses multiple sites. So there's 5 of those. There's one in Oregon, one in Ireland, one in Singapore, Tokyo, and Sydney. Onshape was designed from the ground up. It wasn't modified some other existing software. It was built with everything in mind as far as accessibility and security. It's engineered into every aspect of Onshape. It's great for companies that need to be agile. And by that, I mean, we want to be able to access our data when we need to access our data, and location isn't important. We want to be able to collaborate on that data. That's what's really different about Onshape. It allows people to collaborate at the same time on the same product. Most CAD systems don't do that. They might have a viewer and you can do a conference call, but in this time, it's real-time collaboration. As something changes, everybody sees it. And again, everything is built with security in mind. So Onshape has great productivity, and currently, and this is an older slide, it's actually 99.92% uptime. You can go to the website and see it's very broadcast all the time what the uptime is for Onshape, and it's very good. So you think about your current CAD system, how much downtime does your CAD system have every year? Just installing a new version of CAD will bring you down for a little bit, or anything else that the IT group is doing to the system sometimes brings the CAD system down. Here, everything is done in the cloud with Onshape. You don't see that, it doesn't interrupt you, and you can continue working and getting access to your data anytime you need to. So the nice thing about the cloud is you can access this data, as I mentioned before, from wherever. As long as you can get access to the internet, you can get access to your products. So then the question is, where are my files? And I mentioned before that we use Amazon Web Services. So it's the most established, largest player in that industry, has great reliability. The networks are highly available, and it's globally dispersed, right? So as I mentioned before, there's 5 different locations where Onshape exists, and Amazon allows us to go around the world with this type of philosophy. So the question is, where are my files? As I mentioned before, we got to kind of lose that concept of files. You can bring files into Onshape. You can bring in PDFs and Word docs and anything that has to do with the product that helps the development or description of that product. And Onshape can certainly manage those files, but the CAD portion, that information that Onshape itself creates, is not file-based. Your IP is stored in encrypted, geographically replicated databases across Amazon Web Services. You can export your designs, as I mentioned before, in a file format of your choice. As I mentioned, PDFs or Steps or IGES or SolidWorks or Rhino or whatever, if you want to do files. But again, remember, once we create a file, an exported file like that, it no longer updates, right? We're cutting the cord to any changes that happen. Onshape backs up all its data every 4 hours and restores and validates itself every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks, Onshape creates a new version, right? So updates happen all the time, and everybody's always on the same version. But before they ever release any update, they run it against all the stored data in Onshape to make sure that everything works correctly. There's also 3 replicated copies of your data that are kept up to date at all times. So it's backed up all the time, and there's replicated information all the time. So what's the biggest source of security? Remember, that was the very first polling question that was asked. And remember, the answer was sharing it with suppliers, and then finally crashes. But the real one is employees. And if we think about it, because we have workstations, employees use email, they surf the web on the same machines that are holding all that data. That makes them vulnerable to attacks and to data losses. Viruses and malware can infect those machines and spread throughout that network. Onshape's production environment is isolated. It's not located locally where you are. It's away from you. So you can search the web, you can get on your email, and it won't affect Onshape at all. Onshape servers run only one thing, and that's Onshape. They don't share those servers with other software, other companies. It just runs Onshape. So security isn't something that you just turn on and then you're good to go, right, for the future. It's a constant battle. It's this arm race between the people that make data and the people that want to take data. So you have to be vigilant all the time on both sides. And Onshape is. Threats are dynamic, they're always evolving, as we've seen of late. You know, there's all kinds of ransomware attacks across companies. So protecting your IP is our most important business. There are multiple layers to Onshape. If you think about most companies, we have a firewall, right? And that's the hard thing. It's like the shell on an egg. It's hard to get through that to protect your data. But once you're inside, it's kind of mushy in a lot of companies. Onshape is more like an onion. There are layers of security throughout. They actually contract third-party services who use ethical hackers, which is an interesting term. But what they do is they hack into a independent version of Onshape that's running outside the rest. And they get paid by finding vulnerabilities and hacking into it. And then we fix those. So it's really kind of an interesting way of going about where we pay people to try to hack into our product so that we can keep ahead of the game. Also, one thing is Onshape is SOC2 certified. So any service provider that works with customer data in the cloud can follow these rules. So the SOC certification, I would relate it mostly to like what ISO 9000 is to manufacturing companies, SOC is to software companies. But Onshape is SOC2 certified. There are internal procedures inside of the company of Onshape. You do not have to worry about any Onshape employees having access to your data. The only way that anyone in Onshape can access your data is if you give them permissions, right? And we kind of mentioned that earlier before, is the only way people can see your data is if you give them permission to see it, and then you can turn it off. So the same is true with Onshape. If we need to have somebody help us on the hotline or something like that, we have to give them access to our model before they can see it or use it or access it. So this is an example of that. If I'm working on a part, there's a little button down here on the bottom that says share it with Onshape Support. And then they can go and take a look at your model. In fact, I actually use this myself. I modeled an assembly incorrectly back in the early days. I still do things incorrectly, but this was a beginner's mistake. And I shared the model with Onshape. And the guy actually fixed the model and said, here you go. And this is what you should need to do. And the great thing with Onshape is it stores everything that's done to a design. And so I can easily back out of what he did. I can also look at the steps that he did to fix it. So it was really nice of him to fix it, but if I didn't want him to fix it, I could have just undone everything that he did and then start on my own, in my own direction from where I had the problem. So what can you do to protect your IP? It's kind of simple approach that we take with everything as long as we talk about security, and that's protecting your login credentials. Don't reuse passwords. Don't share your credentials with other people. You can use two-factor authentication in Onshape. You can leverage Onshape's document sharing tools. So again, remember I was talking about how we can share information with others and then revoke that sharing capability anytime that we want. And then also report any suspicious activities to Onshape. So talking about two-factor authentication, under security, we can enable that. You just click on the button, and then we can download an app. The app is downloaded either on our tablet or on our cell phone. We scan in this barcode, and then we enable Onshape to have two-factor authentication. And what that does is it gives a 6-digit password that changes every 30 seconds. So this would be, once we set it up, this would be the password, in this case, the 6-digit number that's generated. And like I said, every 30 seconds, it changes. So if we go in and log into Onshape, once we set that up, we put in our username, we put in our password, and then another window pops up and says, enter in that 6-digit code. And now we can enter in, we get our cell phone or our tablet, we look at the app, it gives us that 6-digit code. We have 30 seconds to enter it in, and then we're good to go. There's a little button right down here. And if this is a secure or a computer that you use frequently, you could say, remember this computer for the next 30 days. Otherwise, if it's a computer that you don't trust or you're using something else that potentially could be at risk, then you just don't check that off. So here's that, again, 6-digit code that we would enter in, and that would allow us then access to Onshape. So what the security does, if you think about Onshape, Onshape is software as a service, right? So the first S is Onshape, that's the software. The second S is the security, and the accessibility, that's the service part of what you get with Onshape. So it allows you to focus on designing great products and allows you to give that information or give people access to that information as they need it. So if you have any more need for information, you can go to www.onshape.com/security, and you can also go and send emails to security@onshape.com to get more information.